Okay, today on the workbench we have a special treat. This is a prototype or demo, whatever you'd like to call it, robot from the 1970s made by Horikawa. And it was a piston robot prototype. And of course it was sent to me for repair because it wasn't doing anything, and there were many reasons why it wasn't doing anything. But the interesting thing about these prototypes is so much of them is handmade. Now they do try to use as much existing stuff as they can, like the feet and the legs, the arms, and the head you can recognize from other Horikawa robots from the 60s and 70s. Even the battery box is recognizable. But the rest of the metal work and all of this piston work and everything you're seeing here is all handmade pieces that are glued together. They're not meant to be durable. They weren't meant to last. They were meant to demonstrate a cosmetic look and a mechanical function. And if someone was interested, then they would proceed on with the toy. So the toy isn't fully designed. It's just prototyped at this point. So that's why it has so many problems. And I'm, of course, not knocking it. It's truly amazing the way it is. Had it gone to the next step, it would have been even cooler yet. But I'm going to run it in a minute. The reason I'm not running it right now and the whole time that I'm talking is, for example, on these pistons, as you can see, you have a shaft here. That's one piece of plastic was simply glued onto the end of that red cap, which is the piston, and then on the back of the red cap there's glued a clear plastic disc, and then onto the back of that disc there's glued a plastic lever which goes into a bell crank. Now I'm going to take the head and shoulders off here in a little bit and show you the insides and explain to you what's going on in there and how it's working. But the reason I'm not going to run it too much is these, of course, frantically move and they kind of blow apart. I've had one of them had this one come apart, and I had to take the whole thing apart and re-glue it back together. So I'm assuming if it fell apart, other ones are going to fall apart. And it was initially sent to me, this one piston here, which was sent in a separate plastic bag, had already come disconnected from the toy and I guess dropped out through a leg hole or something. My assumption when I first saw this and was looking at it that it was 1970s vintage. I wasn't sure if it was going to be Horikawa or whether it was somebody else, but when I talked to the owner of this toy, he said, yeah, he was told it was Horikawa and it was from the 1970s, and they also said that it was incomplete and that the final toy would have probably had lights behind the eyes, so he asked me to go ahead and add some illumination back behind the eyes, and I added some, not in the way they would have done it in the 1970s, but in a way that will look good when it's operating. The main problems that I had in the battery box, it obviously had batteries in it at some point, because the upper contacts, which is the one bar that just shorts the whole two batteries together to get you your 3 volts, was completely eaten away. You touched it and it just crumbled away. It was just gone. So I had to make a new metal piece for that up there in order to complete the circuit. The next problem I had is on this on-off switch that you see here. It swings over and it's riveted into this plastic box at the pivot point where it moves. And the idea is when it comes over, it simply touches the contact on the bottom of the battery box and completes that circuit and then to ground. But the only problem is it doesn't actually have a connection to ground. The only connection to ground it has is if it happens to be rubbing right there. Maybe I should turn this light on. Let's get a little more light on this. Here we go. If it happens to be rubbing on the body, and if the body wasn't painted, that could complete the circuit. That, of course, with the tarnished metal and everything else, wasn't working that great. So I went ahead and added a ground wire to that after I fixed the battery box. Got that hooked up. Of course, the motor wasn't running. It'd been sitting idle for 50 years, 40, 50 years, and had to get in there and get the motor itself working again. So I'm going to go ahead and run it now. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that none of the other piston parts blow apart. there is a rotating light effect behind the pistons in there, and of course it wasn't working at the time, and there were two reasons why it wasn't working. One had to do with corrosion over the years, because they weren't using final plated metal like an actual production toy would use. So the wiper that makes electrical contact when the light is spinning around, because they actually spin a light around, was all corroded and couldn't pass current. But the next problem was, of course, the light has a common metal ground to the frame, as do almost all these robot toys. And the problem is that that whole spinning light effect part is a separate piece from the gearbox, and it's actually mounted to the inside. There's tabs that come through to this plastic battery box on the inside. So it's isolated to plastic and can't get a good connection to ground. Now what they were counting on, since it's a separate part, the shaft that comes out of the bottom of this rotating thing bends at an angle like that, and then the shaft that's coming from the motor down below has a bend like that. And so when they intersect, it can transfer power from this bottom one to the upper one. So their original plan was, well, those two pieces of metal are touching, that could get the ground up to that light and make that work. Of course, that's not an adequate enough ground. The pieces would be bouncing and not always hitting. In this case, both pieces have oxidized and weren't conducting at all. So I had to add a ground wire from that floating spinning light effect to the metal frame to make sure it was getting adequate power. So what else? I think that's it. Let's turn it on. You'll see it walk. You'll see the pistons move. You'll see the eyes light and the spinning light effect behind the chest. And cross your fingers that everything stays together, because you're talking about pieces of plastic that were glued together over 50 years ago. Okay, I'm turning it off because everything still seems to be together. I'm not going to push my luck. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pop the lid and allow you to see what's going on in there. Okay, so as you can see in the top of this head is plastic and it's heat staked. That's when they have pins and they bend them over using usually a soldering gun or something. It was heat staked on, so I couldn't actually remove the head to install separate lights or one light and put a red gel behind the eyes, which is what they typically would have done back in that day. There, in this case, you can see that nice cutout there. That piece of brass is what I added for holding my red LEDs in place. But they would have had a post that probably just went up through there and had red gel and a single light in the back of the head, and that would have lit the whole thing up. Since I couldn't get the head off to do all that, I just went with mounting a couple of red LEDs and a current limiting resistor to this piece of brass and simply soldered the brass to this metal. So when this shoulder part is in place, it's touching the frame ground, and that completes the circuit. Here you can even see the solder in the corners. These pieces are all handmade, precision handmade. It's just totally amazing. Now what makes the pistons move, let's see if we can get the camera to look in there. Do you see this? This is a crank mechanism here. If I keep moving it, maybe you can see different angles. And you can see a piece of clear plastic in the middle. That moves the middle piston. And the top piston is right onto the crank there and down there. And that all goes down to that lever. So you can see that's a pivot point. And that comes over, and that lever is actually connected to the same drive that's driving this light that spins around, and it just moves it back and forth. So that just means that makes this crank move back and forth, and that makes the pistons move back and forth. And when these pistons move on that side, of course the ones on this side are going to move because it's pinned here in the middle. The gearbox itself was very unique. I've been in hundreds, well, probably thousands of vintage toys, and haven't seen this one in anything. So I know that this gearbox was handmade and designed just for this toy. Which, you know, when you think about lining up gears and shafts and everything like that, it's just it's just amazing the quality that they were able to design a toy like this. But there you have it. It's a Horikawa. It's from the Horikawa factory. It's a prototype. Best guess would be early 70s, and it still exists. And now, after all these years, it's working once again.